Hi, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this afternoon's webinar, The Importance of Mental Health at this Unprecedented Time. And I have to say, these really are unprecedented times. It's Josie here from APSCO, by the way, and basically just introducing this afternoon's webinar, as I said. So I do think I'm going to listen along to this one too, because they really are difficult times. So we're all working in different ways that we usually have to work. So I'm thrilled to say that we've got Natasha Clark this afternoon with us, the Chair of Women in Recruitment. Natasha's always excellent at these things. So this is going to be a great interview, guys. And Natasha's going to be interviewing Rhonda D'Ambrosio. Now, Rhonda's a real expert on mental health in recruitment, and I'm very much looking forward to hearing what Rhonda has to say about these unprecedented times, and I'm sure it's going to be a very enjoyable hour. So I'm going to hand you over to Natasha now to introduce both herself and Rhonda, and enjoy the next hour. The one thing I'd just like to say is you can ask questions during the webinar. So if you send those in, so if you think of something whilst Natasha's talking to Rhonda that you think, oh, I'd like to ask Rhonda that, then pop your question within your questions box, and basically they'll pick up on those questions during the interview as it happens. Thanks ever so much. It's over and out from me, so enjoy the webinar, everybody. Over to you, Natasha.
Thank you, Josie, and thanks as always for your very kind introduction, and no pressure at all from you, so thanks. But it's an absolute pleasure to be here today, and thank you all for joining. I hope you're all keeping well, and your families too, and that everyone's adjusting to the changes that we've all had to been through over the last couple of weeks. As Josie said, I'm Natasha Clark. I've been in the recruitment industry for 25 years, both as a recruiter and finally as the Chief People Officer at S3, which is a global recruitment business. So I've been through a number of cycles in the economy, downturns and upturns, but I don't think any of us have been anything quite like what we're going through today. So I think it's really great that Rhonda has given us some time to talk to us about how we look after ourselves in these times of change. And I think the most important aspect that we're all facing at the moment is, albeit we know change is the uncertainty in life, this is just so new and so different for a lot of us. And though many of us used to work from home or have flexible working practices in the way we were working before COVID-19 came along, none of us were working under quite the same levels of uncertainty that we are today, and that does bring with it anxiety and challenges for all of us. So Rhonda, hearing your perspective today, your own personal journey and experiences, and your advice on how we best manage that is really welcomed. So maybe Rhonda, we could start by asking you just to give a little bit of a background to yourself, please.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Natasha, and thanks, Josie. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Rhonda D'Ambrosio. I'm the Transformation Director at Ebenable, and I'm the founder of Mental Health in Recruitment. This is now my 23rd year in the industry. I've worked various roles at various levels, and now I work with recruitment business leaders and their teams on quality of thinking. Most recently, I've been drafted into an organisation called the Kite Program, specifically working in the Kite support arm, which I know we're going to talk a bit more about. But just to give you guys an idea, Kite support is the first wellbeing app created in response to this situation we find ourselves in. So I'm not just working for them, I'm on the project team, and I've co-created it.
Thanks, Rhonda. I've been watching you on LinkedIn this week, and you've clearly been incredibly busy. How have you coped with the changes that have been thrown at us, and what have you been up to?
In the most simplest form, I've been working very hard. I have made a priority of family time. My girls are avid netballers, so we've got a netball post in the garden, and we've been doing like a family netball shootout at the end of every day. We get 25 attempts on goal, and yeah, I'm losing at the moment, but that's really helped breaking up the day. And we've been doing stuff like playing Mario Kart against each other in the evenings and the old-fashioned board games. So that's kind of what's been filling our lockdown.
And I noticed that on LinkedIn you've been working on the Kite program that you just mentioned. What is it that you've been doing over the last week with that?
Okay, so very interestingly, because I've been involved with the Kite Program for about 6 months now, but I've been working with a team that are all based in New Zealand on this. It is remarkable. There's no other way for me to really talk about it, and it's really a resource to support mental health, well-being of individuals and remote workers during this. We keep saying it, this unprecedented time. People are finding themselves in isolation, and we've got key workers that are finding themselves facing a very new type of pressure on the front line. So it's been a bit of a journey. We had to respond to everything that was happening around the world. And, we've pulled together a series of modules that cover personal well-being, social well-being, leadership, and also work. What's quite different about it is the concept of the Kite program, the original business, is based on micro learning. So it's not like other apps out there. This is about doing very, very small bite-sized pieces to kind of manage the different states that we find ourselves in. And by doing that and slowing things right down, that gives us not only a better sense of control, but also it enables us to sort of not get overwhelmed by everything that's happening around us.
Okay, thank you. Well, we'll touch a little bit more on that in a moment, but what is it that you found easiest and hardest to change in terms of the way you've been working then over the last few weeks?
Oh, crikey. Easiest I would say would be the tech adoption. Having spent a few years running a virtual recruitment businesses, I was really familiar with the nuance of working in this way. That understanding that communication has to be quite different, understanding the different levels of tech that different people are going to use make a difference to how we channel that communication. But I think the hardest has been to stop and take breaks. I've been, against a deadline, incredibly passionate about doing this. It's definitely, I've been driven by purpose, which has been, phenomenal, and really being disciplined despite what I'm trying to achieve, to stop, to slow down, to do those things with the children, we stop at lunch, we all have a family lunch together. That's been really, really hard. I think if you work in a conventional space, you are used to going out, you're used to talking to people and taking short breaks, reframing yourself. And when we remove all of that noise, it creates and gives a better, a stronger intensity to the way in which we apply ourselves. That's in the most positive sense. I'm very fortunate. I know that there are a number of people I've spoken to in the last week that have struggled, that have been furloughed, and have found that sense of purpose somewhat removed, and having they're having the opposite, if that makes sense. But those are my personal ones.
Thank you, and I do concur with that. I think we talk a lot about purpose in the workplace these days, and I think there's an element for all of us. Some of our workload has got quieter. For some of us, our workload has remained the same. But it's reminding yourself why you're doing what you're doing whilst you're at home, when you're not in the confines of your normal environment. But also, I think finding other things, isn't there, when it is quieter, or perhaps you haven't got quite the same amount of work, to repurpose yourself. And that can be challenging you sometimes to repurpose yourself in a way that just makes you a better person when you come out the other side of it, because that purpose element of life is so key to positivity and how your mind is. I've been looking at the Kite program, and I've been privileged to have been able to take a sort of preview of it as we've been talking. And I guess one of the questions that I had was, what was it that really inspired you to get involved with a project like that?
Wow, there's a couple of reasons actually, and it's a really good question. And I would say, in the first instance, when I started dealing with Hannah Hardy-Jones at the Kite program, her personal authenticity and bravery really drew me in. Her why. For anyone that's followed me and my journey and knows why I now do what I do, mine's almost a direct reaction to what happened with my mum. So not something that, yes, of course it impacted me on a personal level, but it isn't necessarily a deep trauma. Hannah had her first daughter, her first child, and absolutely out of the blue was diagnosed with bipolar, and it really rocked her world, and she suffered quite acutely, and I think I'm a sucker for anybody that chooses to respond to these things in a certain way. You know, I talk about this a lot, and I think it was the fact that Hannah's journey to wellness created the Kite Program, you know, and it originally started life as Kite for Mum. So that's kind of what, you know, really inspired me in terms of, oh, what's this about? Why is this the type of organisation and product I would like to be involved in? Because, you know, I've been approached a lot in the last year and a half, 2 years about a variety of different products in market, and you know, it is really important for me to make sure that I'm aligning myself with individuals that meet my values there. But when she came to me about Kite support and asked me to be involved, you know, not only was I very privileged and very humble, but I was seeing at the time some really, what I would call great reactivity around me. So as COVID-19 started to be, you know, filtered through the press more and more, and, you know, you were seeing the various stories on LinkedIn of what people were doing, how they were giving things away, all of the different things people were doing for free and to support each other. I kind of thought, this is really good. But interestingly, why are we reacting like that? And, you know, this comes back to our survival response being triggered. And, you know, what that means is that, you know, we're seeing a threat to our survival, and we're kind of then looking at what we need to do to minimize that threat. And we're being creative. We're finding new ways of working. But we're kind of forgetting that emotionally and mentally it is going to impact us. And the easiest way I can describe it, it's like when you may have an injury and you become high on endorphins. You know, endorphins mask pain, and, you know, it almost feels like, yeah, this is good, we're on a high, we can do this, we can get through. But I could almost see what was going to be happening when those endorphins would wear off, and that's the novelty factor of working in this way for businesses that don't do this, for individuals that don't do this, and recruitment business leaders that don't do this. You know, we haven't even really reached the peak of remote working and what that's going to do to our, you know, our mindset. You know, if we consider that we may be in lockdown for at least another 4, maybe even 8 weeks or longer, you know, we have to really make sure that we are giving ourselves the tools to be able to cope with this. And something that came out of a conversation I had very recently was that from an employment law perspective, there is a suggestion that if companies aren't doing the right things for their people, if they're not supporting them, there may be an increase in litigation around mental health and wellbeing support. And that blew my mind. I was like, wow, you know, you don't even consider it in that way. So, you know, I think it was seeing all of this stuff going on around me and thinking, this is brilliant, but it's short term. We're short term putting a, you know, sticky plaster on. And, you know, what we really need to be doing is strengthening our mental foundations and our mindsets to enable us to sustain this situation that each one of us are in right now for the long term. I hope that answers the question, Natasha.
Thank you. And you know, there are a number of words that you pulled out there that you know, really struck with me. And one was, you know, during this time, we are all going to have to be a bit brave, aren't we, and confront the situation. We are all going to have to look at how do we create opportunity out of adversity, and we have to think about how we remain authentic during this time as well, because as you said, the only way you can sustain a certain behavior is if mentally you're in a good place and if your behavior is authentic to you. So finding ways to cope and mechanisms to allow you to retain that is so important. And I think that's where a lot of the work you've been doing, and certainly as I've heard you speak and talk in the past, it really allows us all to think about, you know, that element of authenticity and that element of not just physical fitness but mental fitness.
Yes,
and I think things will wear off at one point. It's all been a bit of a novelty to us, and we've gone into that, you know, mode of, oh my goodness, this is different, we're reacting, it's all a bit scary. But what happens when this settles and it becomes the norm and we have to accept this is the new norm? So very interesting, thank you. I mean, there's a lot of good content that's coming through on the programme that you've put together, and one of the things I was also interested in was whether there was anything that you personally took away as you looked at the content, pulled it together and thought about what your audience might like to takeaway. What special takeaways did you get from the material that as you were researching it?
Oh God, so yeah, I the biggest thing, I guess, as I looked at the library and looked at the topics and content, was how much there is to explore in each of the 4 areas. So just to give everybody an idea, in personal wellbeing, we're talking about things like coping with uncertainty, coping with anxiety, mindset and positivity, values and purpose, relationship with tech, resilience, mindfulness at home, mental health awareness, that kind of stuff. Leading through change, we're talking about leading through adversity and health promoting leadership, managing remote teams and so on. Social wellbeing is about how we connect, our communications, the sort of the relationships, how we're dealing with our kids and coping at home, from isolation to parental guilt, among other things, and new ways of working, such as coping with change, remote working, working with stressed people, habits for success, and so on. So there was this broad reach of and I've not even touched upon all of them, of content that made me realize all of this stuff is available, right? There are resources for all of us on the internet. We can go away and we can look at different tips and techniques for each of these particular areas. But what kind of, it wasn't that it didn't blow me away as such. That would be probably an exaggeration, but what took my breath away a bit was the fact that we are pulling all of this together in one place, and the idea of that, to remove that feeling of being overwhelmed, that was like, wow, this is brilliant, this is remarkable, and it's bespoke to this, to COVID-19 and the situation we're all in. So I think my personal takeaway was the fact that if we want this information, we could go out and we could potentially find it, but wow, it's all in one place. And I'm going through these as well. I'm looking at different ones about communication, and not only the ones I've written, but I'm working through it as a way to practice what I preach, because it will impact my quality of thinking as much as everybody else's.
And I think when I looked at it, Rhonda, I mean, there's certainly some standout bits for me. One was where you talk about, worry about the things you can control and don't allow the things you can't control to cause you unnecessary stress and anxiety. One of them was really, really simple, and I must admit I've been practicing it the last 2 days. It's just, if the bad news is getting you down, turn it off, don't listen to it,
Yeah,
because it's going on anyway. And sometimes, we make ourselves feel worse by the fact that we're just not hearing the good news out there at the moment. Yeah. So if that's something that you struggle with, just shut it out for a period of time and focus on the things that make you feel good.
Yes.
I mean, we're mostly on the Women in Recruitment program here today, but I'm very mindful that hopefully it's not just women that have joined us, and we've been able to extend the webinar to our members' audience within their entire organisations. But it did also strike me that as a mother and a female, were there any aspects of this programme that you felt particularly resonated from a gender perspective, or did you feel that in essence actually the challenges that possibly as women we're facing could also extend very much to our male audience?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point and a really interesting question. The app is, of course, for everybody. Its origin story is deeply embedded, as I said, in Kite for Mums, which was created in response to the situation new mums may find themselves in. But I think if you look at what we're all trying to deal with at the moment, and the families that have younger children that are trying to split their time out, I think this touches upon the diversity and inclusion theme around a number of different areas. You've got the fact that we all have mental health, and it's still hard to talk to people we don't know and we do know about how we're feeling. You've got the splits in terms of who's doing what with what child, and the mum guilt I'll touch on, because I've had 4 conversations this week of mums that have very, very hands-on partners, and the dads play an equal and vital role in raising the children, but because the dads are in what I would call more stable employment right now, it's not impacting them as much. Some of these mums, and it won't be the same for everybody, I know that, but some of these mums are having to defer how they approach their work to be the primary carer. So I think that the ethos within Kite Support and what it means and how it looks at parental guilt, not mum guilt, but parental guilt, and how we're all dealing with how we're working and how we can manage those emotions, I think it will help facilitate those conversations at home and enable us to talk to each other about the balance of needs. Because if you are an individual that is used to being in the office and you've had daycare for your children, and you are the primary carer, whether you're male or female, to find yourself in a situation where you're now having to sacrifice your time and your purpose outside of being your parental purpose, that's going to impact you. That's going to impact your mental health for sure. So I would say that the program, if you were doing it at home as a couple, as my poor husband, I'm saying, look, can you look at it as well? I want to get your feedback. It will facilitate conversations between you to talk about some of this stuff.
That's really interesting, actually. I hadn't quite looked at it from that angle, but I think, a lot of us are now spending much more time with people that we didn't spend as much time with before, and our work family is now our family. And sometimes raising those challenges or the feelings we're experiencing can be quite difficult, can't it? Particularly when you're already in maybe a situation that's more tense than it may usually have been. So having an opportunity to read things together or go through something together that triggers those thoughts and those concepts to allow you to discuss them and talk about them in a non-confrontational way is that's a really good idea, Rhonda. And I think that whether we're using Kite or anything else, that's a great example of one way of tackling, I suppose, a subject matter that we might struggle to bring up otherwise.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's interesting that you talk about guilt, because again, as I was going through your material and I was thinking about myself, and you've touched on this aspect of parental guilt, which probably for the men and women that are going through this at the moment is going to be a testing and challenging concept to tackle. But I think there's also another element of guilt that I'm just interested in exploring a bit further, and that's that sense that there are some companies out there that haven't yet embraced the whole working from home ethos. There are still people that were struggling with the concept of presenteeism, and if you're not at your desk, you're not actually working. And one of the concerns that I've had, only because I've been through it myself, is this guilt that possibly I'm not doing enough work, this guilt that should I be 24/7 available, this guilt that if someone emails me at midnight and I don't respond, does that look like I'm not working as hard as them? The guilt that I might have to prove myself because people cannot physically see what I'm doing. I think that's quite a big one. Have you got any advice on that?
Yes, I know people won't think this, but it's like which kites I've written, because I did write the one on not general guilt, on parental guilt. Honestly, Natasha didn't know that. So if I draw into so each of the kites 5-day programs, and I just want to touch upon 2 areas of the parental guilt one that I think is relevant to what you're saying, and that is expectations and really the expectations that we set ourselves, and how in the kind of varying if you look at the normal routine of life that we have, whether it's around parenting or work or whatever we're doing, we have various levels of support around us, and that's changed. So what we really need to do is readjust our expectations of ourselves right now. That is absolutely key. The second piece, and this is the most important piece for me, is the compassion element. If you were to look at how we want to model behavior in the people that we work with or the people that we love, we don't want to teach them feelings of guilt. We don't want to teach them to have a guilt response. We want them, the people we care about, to be compassionate. And that can only really start when we are compassionate towards ourselves, and we don't do it. You've just said it, you're really hard on yourself, you're questioning what you're doing. So again, it comes back to sort of feeling and choosing how you respond to guilt is going to increase how you model that for the people around you, but it'll help you stop being so hard. When you practice compassion, that ties towards the gratitude element, and it's far easier to think about that than it is to beat yourself with a stick. It isn't a helpful thought process and thought pattern if you're trying to manage stress, anxiety, and what we're going through. So my big piece of advice on that is practice compassion towards yourself and other people.
And I guess Rhonda, practically as well, there are elements of setting yourself realistic daily goals or objectives. I think we've had to become more short-term in our focus than long-term at the moment. We have to allow ourselves to have some small daily or weekly successes to still make us feel purposeful and still make us feel as though we've added value or we've achieved something. And I guess the other thing that's really important, and I've seen this again with the clients I've been working with, that I think it touches close to the compassion piece, is still recognizing when things do go well, recognizing the successes that are still going on around us, commenting on the good work that's been done, commenting on the support we can give each other and the help we can give each other. But I think we have to, like you said, adjust our expectations of ourselves, be mindful of the expectations we put on our colleagues around us, but also be honest in talking about these things with our colleagues and our peer groups and try to work through some of it together. So I'll come back to the comment I made earlier around controlling what you can control. And obviously at the moment, a lot of us feel like an awful lot of things have been taken out of our control. And I guess, again, with what's going on today, there's so much uncertainty around how things will unfold, the length of time we might be in this place. And because none of us have actually gone through this and come out the other side before, it's not like a recession where we kind of felt like, well, we've been here and we know where it might go. How does the programme help us manage that real aspect of uncertainty and the wind could blow any way?
Do you know, I genuinely believe that everything we're dealing with right now creates a bigger feeling of being out of control and therefore fear. When we feel overwhelmed, it's because there's an underlying fear there that this is out of our hands. So I think the Kite support program in its entirety and having these resources in one place will help us choose our response to things. And it's okay to feel the way we feel. I listened to something somebody else put on LinkedIn yesterday talking about whether or not is anger a bad emotion, and my response is that there are no bad emotions really. They're all vital to our survival as humans, but it is how we choose to respond to them which is where our power is. And I think having something to reach to, having something that can be a resource at these times will definitely lend itself to feeling maybe not totally in control, but giving people some visibility and some answers, and I guess some practical ways in which to address how they're feeling.
Thanks, Rhonda. And just a reminder to those of you that are listening, if there are any questions that you would like to start sending through now in preparation to the Q&A at the end, please start to think about what you'd like to explore a bit further with Rhonda and send them through to us. So Rhonda, coming back then to this concept of trust and looking at this from a leadership perspective, one of the things I learned when I went through some of the content you asked me to review was the concept of emotional and cognitive trust. I thought it might be quite interesting for you to just talk a little bit about the difference in the two and how, either as leaders or as people being led, how do we look to build both elements of trust in the teams around us so that we get the best out of the situation at the moment?
Yeah, I think, oh God, this is something that's coming up so much at the moment. And when I've talked about brain chemistry in the past, for those of you that may have listened to that or seen the presentation that I've got on LinkedIn, I talk about all of the different happy chemicals we have in our brain, and I touch upon oxytocin. And the oxytocin is what people typically associate with, having a new baby, and what we feel when we feel, bonded and trusted and close and so on. And this is very present in work and team dynamics. So, if you consider the relationship that you have with your teams, your employers, your employees, it's so taken for granted. How we manage those relationships and the level of emotional and cognitive trust we have is almost just an automatic response. But if you were to look at ways in which you can cultivate that and build that trust, remotely and authentically, it ties back to what I would call a standard management framework that should be in place at all times. And if it isn't, now is the time to make sure that it is. And in summary, the way I would define it is, as a leader, setting very clear directions and being transparent. Understanding what the expectations are of you and for your teams and so on, and the people and those around you, being a good communicator, and ensuring, you touched upon this, that feeding back, that touching back with people is so much more important. It would be very easy to just save it to sort of the end of week team or Zoom or whatever the tools are that you guys are using, but we kind of need more touch points when we work remotely, because it's a different type of engagement. And as I said earlier, you can miss some of the visual cues from people and how they're feeling. So we really mustn't take that for granted. And then the recognition piece, the recognition that people are doing well, that people are responding in the right way, or speaking to people about when they're not responding in the right way, but treating them with the compassion and getting themselves back on track. We're not all going to be perfect, but being open and being transparent is what really gives that level of trust at all levels, because it's the authentic piece. You know where you stand with people. The problem you've got now, if you look at how we feel about the communications from government, it's what we don't know that bothers us. And you've got to look at it that way. If you're a business owner, or you're managing a team, it's what people don't know that causes anxiety, that level of uncertainty. So that, for me, it's a simple framework, but I think it's fundamental. You may feel that by not telling people, well, it's good, they don't need to know that, but in the situation we're all in and working remotely, you have to be tighter and far more cohesive now more than ever.
Thank you. And I think the word communications come out several times as we've been talking. And I think I talk a lot about being humble and showing humility. And I think now's the time for us to recognise we're all humans. None of us are untouchable by what's going on today. And so being humble, showing humility, whether you're a team member or a team leader, allows the people around you to be able to empathise. And probably also allows them to be more authentic with you, because they're not feeling like they have to put on this front and be superhuman. And I think actually one of the things you're really good at, Rhonda, and it struck me as you did your intro earlier, is storytelling. And one of the reasons I so love talking to you is you tell stories a lot of the time to give examples of situations and how to handle them. I've actually got to know your family and dog, I think, quite well through your story.
I'm surprised you all haven't heard him, actually. Yeah, they're being very good, both of them. But
but I think I just wanted to pick up on that, because storytelling is a really important way of allowing others to learn from you in that authentic way. Sharing experiences. I mean, you're very humble about sharing with us earlier how you're spending your family time together and how you're breaking up your day. And I think if we can allow ourselves to share those things with our colleagues, bring the human element in, but just talk about how it's affecting us and tell the story, I think that's a helpful way for us to build that trust, that empathy, and to allow ourselves to feel a bit more comfort from what's going on around us. Okay, I'm going to ask you one more question, but just before that, I'm going to ask you, Rhonda, if you don't mind, can you see any questions coming through? Because I can't see any on my screen at the moment, and I'm not sure.
No, I can't, nothing yet. Is that a good thing? Let's hope so.
So again, just another prompt to anyone that might like to ask a question, please do send them through. So finally, Rhonda, my last question to you ties into, again, something that you touched on earlier, which is I'm a great believer that out of adversity comes opportunity. And I was wondering what you saw as the opportunity here for the people that are listening on the call today.
God, nothing like ending on a tough question, Natasha. Okay, so I would say that proactive thinking, as opposed to reactive thinking, from an industry point of view, and getting back to being service-led and setting ourselves apart from competitors, is the opportunity there. You know, having those real conversations and talking to people about how it's impacted them is going to ignite a different type of conversation and opportunity, without a doubt. And also, I think there's a huge opportunity for us as individuals, you know, husbands, wives, loved ones, to really reconnect to the things that are important to us. The biggest lesson I've learned in the last 2 weeks is how being driven by purpose and, you know, out of this, being ignited to be a part of something that I've given my time for free. I think it's probably important I tell anyone that this isn't about you know, we're not trying to be millionaires. This is about reducing the price point on kite support, actually, to make this accessible for everyone. So it's not about that. I've given my time for free and I've been fueled by purpose, and just by doing that, it has created, I can't even begin to tell you the amount of opportunity and new introductions and new people that were not on my radar 2 weeks ago. So that's what I mean by proactive. When you try to do something different, it will not only enrich you, and as almost cliche as that sounds, there is a whole brain chemistry element to that. You know, when you set yourself out of your comfort zone and look at doing things in a different way, it's good for your happiness. Have a look at rewiring your brain, Natasha, in the app. But it's so important, and that's what will keep, you know, many of us sane in these times, to sort of, you know, see, well, what can I do differently, you know. And even if if you're working for another business, I've always, in any of the almost, I don't do it as much anymore, but the sales development performance training I used to do, it's, if this was your business and you couldn't get paid, for example, what would you be doing differently? So that's where I believe there is scope for opportunity if people are asking themselves those questions.
Well, I'll tell you what, you're really well answering that. Well done to you. I didn't realise what question that was till I asked you. So thank you. And just to sum up there, what I heard, and to sort of add just a little bit, I think if from an audience perspective we take away purpose and reminding ourselves what is our purpose, and maybe this is a good opportunity to reset our purpose. I think your point around change, we often get into habits, a lot of which can be good habits. Sometimes we find ourselves creating lots of unhelpful habits. And it takes the trigger to break that cycle and allow us to perhaps reset in a better way. So this is an opportunity for that. And I think there's also an opportunity to hear, and I think this has come through in some of what you said today, which is to invest in ourselves and really think about how we use this time to better ourselves, for self-learning, self-development, and, you know, using this break in the cycle, if you like, for a bit of a reboot. But we've got a few questions now coming in, Rhonda, and I think one of them starts on what advice would you give those that have been furloughed, which I guess for some people they're going to take it quite pragmatically and see this as an opportunity just to have a bit of time out to invest in themselves, with the view that hopefully they'll be going back to work when the time is right, and perhaps there'll be others that will suffer a bit more anxiety from that. What would your advice to those people be?
I think for those individuals, it's understanding that, and perspective's a great thing. I think it's a very, very good leveler, but it really isn't personal. And I've seen this pop up a lot on LinkedIn in the last couple of days, that individuals should be aware that it doesn't impact, what they've been doing and what they could do for a business. And actually, by being furloughed, they are still integral to the survival of that business. So I think that is absolutely key for them to realise that, by being furloughed, by being one of those individuals that's been, I don't want to say chosen or selected, they're still playing a really insignificant part in terms of the organisation's success.
Thank you. So there's a few more that are coming in, and I'll see if I can merge some of them together. But there's one particularly around, if employees are struggling with their mental health, what advice would you give to support them?
It's a really tough one, because it's a fine line in understanding, how to approach them as an employer, or if they're coming to you with a very specific issue. And this is where I think we've got a bit of a fall down in the industry on what mental health first aid looks like. And if you were to consider the mental health first, MHFA, who are the body that run the mental health first aid stuff, they have a very clear structure on how to work with people, how to cope with people. And it's very, very simple. It's about approaching somebody who may be feeling that way, or who has given you an indication that may be feeling that way. It's about you listening to them non-judgmentally, and then giving support where you can. And then the last two, the most important two that probably answer this question, is encouraging them to speak to friends and family and people they trust, and encouraging them, if necessary, to get professional help. Now, this is what we've identified and what I've talked to somebody about this morning, fantastic individual lady who's been in the the NHS for 25 years. And we're talking about the fact that, in our kind of our communities, we are just not geared up for prevention. So, it's a horrible one, because I don't want to say, oh yeah, get them to look at Kite support, but this is exactly what that resource is for. And if it isn't Kite support, direct them to somewhere else where they can get resources, whether it's Mind or anywhere else. But that impartiality, I think, is really, really key. Somebody may be outside of a business, because if you don't know how to have these conversations with people, you can feel really, really awkward, and you almost feel like you don't know what you're saying, and you're not qualified to have those conversations. But moreover, what I see is people that care to that level, that want to help, have high empathy. And if you don't know how to set those personal boundaries, you will start feeling some of the stuff that people are telling you about. So for you as an individual, it's clear that you give them maybe some support and some advice on where to go and what they can do. And this is why I'm trying to talk to businesses at the moment, but remember to just separate your own emotions from that. So be supportive without absorbing.
Okay. And in light there, Rhonda, I think you've answered that question from the perspective that there are things that individuals can take and own themselves in terms of helping themselves, which is using a tool such as Kite or a number of the other tools that are available out there. I think the answer you gave somewhat assumed that the manager perhaps had an element of empathy. What happens if we got managers that we work for that really just don't get it, or appear to not understand that this thing should even be given consideration?
We know that's the case, and it does continue to disappoint me. And I think that any business leader right now is being very remiss of the seriousness of the situation we're all going to find ourselves in 4 to 6 weeks in terms of our mindset. And this is the conversation I had with somebody about 5 days ago. You will give your teams access to Zoom, right, or to Microsoft Teams, or to something that will enable them to remote workly. It is just as much of a priority to give them resources that can support them with this kind of stuff as well. If you genuinely have a manager that isn't doing that, and you can't talk to them internally, then reach out to people out there, and drop me a line. We haven't pushed forward with the mental health and recruitment initiative, but the idea for that is that not only is it a platform of resources for recruitment businesses, leaders, HR and recruiters, but it's also a platform to shine a light on the situations that recruiters and individuals still find themselves in the industry. You know, we'll do that part anonymously, but this is why I believe it's absolutely fundamental that we're driving change for mental health and recruitment right now.
Well, and it's really good that you're putting it out there on the agenda. I mean, there's been a lot more noise about mental health over the last year or two, and I think the situation we find ourselves in now will definitely put this back on the map. And it's people like yourselves, I guess, that are very passionate about making a difference in this space that are going to help it stay on the agenda, because quite frankly, it shouldn't come off just when this is all over. You know, there's another aspect possibly to touch on, which might answer another one of the questions that came through, which asks about the benefit and importance of taking holiday to benefit mental health. And just as I'm reading that now, I'm thinking, well, you know, there possibly maybe people that are struggling out there now, where maybe furloughing them or maybe asking to be furloughed could be the appropriate thing to do. If a bit of time out might just give them the space they need to get themselves fit again in terms of mentally. But I mean, I don't quite know where the question necessarily came from, but I think taking holiday is incredibly important, and I'm sure you as I would advocate that people should be making sure during the normal course of work that they are taking their holidays to allow themselves to have some time to get both physically and mentally fit.
Oh God, absolutely. And stress is one of those, you know, the thing about stress is it either presents mentally or physically, and majority of the time people don't respond to it until there's a physical response to it. But the mental one is the stuff that can lead to the bigger issues. So, you know, taking a break, like I was saying earlier on about the stuff I'm trying to force myself to do, taking a break and recharging is just absolutely vital to it's just look at muscles. For those of you that know anything about, you know, physiology and how our bodies respond, people go to the gym and they work their muscles and they have to have recovery days because the muscles have to recover to get stronger. And that's when I talk about resilience, that's exactly what I say. You know, if resilience was a muscle, you know, how we pushing it and then how we letting it recover to come back stronger. So yeah, take time. We all need it.
That's a really nice analogy, actually. I might pinch that one if you don't mind. I think that's quite good. Okay, well, I think that that seems to be the last of the questions, Rhonda, that has come through. So before I hand back to Josie, I just would like to say a massive thank you to you, because I know you've been so busy the last couple of weeks. So giving us the benefit and value of your experience and thinking has been really kind of you. So Josie, I'll hand over to you now and just wrap up by saying that Rhonda said it earlier, but if anyone would like to reach out to myself or Rhonda to get any support or advice over the coming weeks, then we'd be very happy to step in and help where we can. Josie, over to you.
Yeah, fantastic, Nasha. Nasha. He's suddenly become a comic character. Wasn't that somebody out of Beano? Anyway, thank you very much, Natasha and Rhonda. Sorry, I can't control myself now. Very well. We've had a few comments in saying thank you very much for answering the questions, and thanks a lot for all your. So that's really great. Thanks ever so much.
Thank you for having me, ladies.
Thank you very much indeed. Look forward to seeing you at the next webinar. Goodbye, everybody. Bye.
Bye. Rhonda?
Hello.
You still there?